innovator and team builder. He had started multiple technology companies. In between, he worked and learned at Fortune 100 companies as well. Currently, he is EB5 mentor, educator to the companies and investors on EB5 project and investment. Mr. Coyle is a successful angel investor and mentor for technology startup companies in the Valley and overseas. He helped launch the Arizona chapter of TIE. He holds multiple patents in automation of electric meter reading and energy management technology. So I welcome Satish Koilaji.
Thank you, Anil Bhai. Namaskar. The session, which is this session 4, is for EB5, immigrant visa education mostly, to educate the Indian diaspora about the opportunities which are there where it allows the investor to become a permanent resident in US. So this is a program which has been there, put together by US government back in 1990. And then a program called Regional Center started in 1992. So we just wanted to introduce my fellow speakers, which is Adrian Pomeroy. Adrian is is an author and a writer and also a marketing director for EB5 Investor Magazine, which has over 50,000 plus circulation. And then I have Rohit Kapuria, who I had pleasure working with in the past. And Rohit has been a EB5 attorney representing the investors and also helping companies to enforce the EB5 program as a project in the EB5 Regional Center manager. That's how I had met him when he was doing it for another friend of mine out in Arizona. So he comes with tons and tons of experience. Currently, he was with Clasco Law Firm out of Philadelphia, but he resides in Phoenix, Chicago. Then now he currently moved to another firm called Arnstein and Lair, one of the leading EB5 EB5 attorneys who specialize in both the EB5 investment to the investors and also on the projects. Ronnie Fieldstone and his team, they are one of the leading SEC attorneys who are very, very familiar with the EB5 structuring for businesses that are seeking investments. So without any further ado, I will allow Adrian to go ahead and come in and talk about what his overview on the EB5 and the market and the opportunities. Adrian? Yeah, it's left up to you. Yeah, it's left up to you. Okay.
This mic is good?
Yeah.
All right.
Your slides first and then we'll
Okay. Yeah, let's all right. And then how do we flip it to the next slide when we're done?
This is the one.
Okay, but there's two slides. There's
Yeah.
this one.
After that, you just click around.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you so much to Satish for inviting us to be part of this today. As he said, my name is Adrian Pomeroy. I'm the EB5 training program manager at eb5investors.com and EB5 Investors Magazine. We are kind of the educational networking and marketing platform for the EB5 community, which is kind of nice because a heavy focus on education. We're a great place to come to just kind of learn about the program, get some feedback, all before you really dive kind of head first into the program and hire somebody like Rohit down here. So We're very happy to take incoming calls, to go to our website, and very helpful feedback in terms of that. One of my specific jobs at the company is project evaluation for incoming developers who found this EB5 program and want to know how it works and whether their project is going to be a good fit for EB5. So come to you guys today with a pretty good background about projects, compliance, and also marketability for various nations around the world. As Satish said, the original EB5 program was formed in 1990. It was part of the Immigration Act of 1990. Established a number of visa categories, including the employment-based fifth category. This category of immigration allows an alien entrepreneur to invest $500,000 or $1 million into a U.S. project or business, and if they create 10 permanent jobs, they're able to get a green card. There's a very important distinction to be made between this and the 1993 Regional Center Pilot Program, which brought about the regional side of things. It's important because the Regional Center Pilot Program needs extending every couple of years, or in this case, in December 9th. So you may, if you Google EB5, you may see an article, what's the future of EB5? Will it go away? Will it get extended? That's specifically relating to the EB5 Regional Center Pilot Program, even though it's been a pilot program for 23 years, which if you ask me, it's a long time for a pilot program. But the base EB5 program, which is a direct option, has been around since 1990. That has been permanently codified. That's not going anywhere. So with that out of the way, let's move on to our next portion here. So EB5 was created in 1990 and 1993, yet it was very dormant for a long, long time. As I pointed out in this slide, even in 2005, you had less than 400 participants in this program. And this was a program designed by the government, obviously, to do two things: attract foreign capital to U.S. development and businesses, and also to bring great, bright minds into the country, into the United States. So the two kind of marries those two ideas, yet nobody was participating. So as we know here, we've got a panel at this great conference in front of several hundred people talking about EB5. So what were the things that happened to make this become such a big thing? First and foremost, we had the great economic recession of 2008-2009. You've got a lot of businesses and developers who up until that time were able to go out to traditional lending institutions and basically get blank checks. That obviously, the fall of 2008, that came to an end. So you had a lot of, real estate developers, quick service restaurant franchises, energy companies, things of that nature, who woke up one day and said, well, I've still got this pretty good project that I'd like to try and go forward with. What do we do? And people stumbled into EB5, and well, I go out and find these immigrant investors. They can put $500,000 into my project, and I can help fill out my capital stack for my hotel, for my condominium complex, for my private company, things of that nature. So that also kind of corresponded almost perfectly, too, with a rise in individual wealth in China. Sorry, we'll have to talk about China a little bit here today because it drives EB5 at the moment, and everything gets compared to what happens in China. So China now has, as of 2015, had 3.6 millionaires. It now has, 1 million of those were in 2014 that came on board. So this new rise in wealth and a receptive audience, also with some infrastructure there. So those two things really kind of timed up perfectly there. So yeah, so you can see we went from literally from the 1990s through the mid-2000s, 300, 400 participants a year in this program. We now have 19,000 pending I-526 applications. So it's completely exploded. It's everywhere. You Google it, you'll find all kinds of stuff. So these are the two kind of culminating things that happened with EB5 that made this program what it is today. It was the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and then the rise of independent personal wealth in China. And 50% of the Chinese millionaires that have been surveyed want to leave China. So it's a ready, willing, and able audience with an infrastructure of migration agents that are licensed through the Chinese government, who are also used to selling other investor immigration platforms. I guess before we go any further, we should also clarify a little bit about what's different about the Regional Center program. If you're doing what's called a direct investment, which was done with the 1990 legislation, For example, you may have an IT company or a restaurant. That money basically directly comes into your business, and the job creation is basically shown by your payroll, by your W-2s. But in 1993, they wanted to kind of expand what EB-5 could be, also wanted more participation because, again, at this point, you were getting very little participation in EB-5. So the Regional Center program, and I hate the word Regional Center because it gives people a false idea of what it is. People think it gives you like a territorial right to a certain area. It doesn't. Where we sit here in Southern California, there's 75 to 100 regional centers that could do a project on this land. So it's not a territorial right thing, but what it does is this special program was going to change the way we look at job creation for how the jobs would be measured by the investors. So along with directs now, developers could take advantage of what are called indirect and induced jobs. Indirect jobs you can kind of think of as jobs in your supply chain. So if you're running this hotel, you know, there's a lot of vendors that are supplying you with products that are going to be a part of your daily use here. Those people are indirect jobs. Induced looks at how your project affects the surrounding community. So you can imagine you put a big hotel like this here in Orange County, perhaps FedEx needs an extra driver, perhaps the restaurant across the street has to hire a couple other people. So this was very good, especially for real estate projects, because they depend heavily on these induced and indirect jobs. Direct jobs also very good for smaller companies, quick service restaurant franchises, and things of that nature. So that's one of the reasons the Regional Center program was created, is to kind of broaden the horizons of EB-5, what projects could take advantage of it, and go from there. So let's look a little bit about what's going on in China, because it is the driving force in this market, and because it's such a big force in the market, unfortunately, most of the products that we see in the marketplace as far as projects are aimed at the Chinese market. So as we see domestically domiciled, especially when you're looking at the UCs or some of those Big Ten schools in Michigan, Wisconsin, things of that nature. So, but China is not the only market that's online, but as you can see from the slide, you know, after China in 2015, the next group down was Vietnam, and they only were responsible for 230 plus applications. India comes in at 111. So we're starting to see the Vietnamese market do that hockey stick curve. Obviously, it doesn't have the population base that a China or an India does. So I can tell you we field not only developer inquiries, but also inquiries from potential investors around the world. And I can tell you there's a lot of other interest from other places around the world. But as we'll get into later, it's going to be a lot of questions about developing infrastructure, getting education out to the masses about what this program is about. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rohit. He's a great attorney. He's going to do a good job at kind of talking a little bit more about the mechanics that actually the investor faces. And then we can definitely get into some good Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. So as a show of hands, I'm just curious, how many people in this room have heard of EB-5? Okay. How many people are on H-1B right now? Okay, not that many. How many with a priority date of 5 or 6 years? 1, all right, okay. So EB-5 in terms of knowledge base in India is lacking. There are not that many people that know about EB-5. I go to India about 4 or 5 times a year to do seminars like this or to meet in person with certain developers. And the key feedback is always a sense of miscommunication about what exactly is a program, how does it work. So the number one issue that we must understand is what the functionality of EB-5 is. EB-5, as Adrian said, was created by US Congress for job creation. The idea was a foreign investor who had a lot of money would be willing to put funds into the US and create jobs. At the end of the day, if the jobs were created and the EB-5 requirements were met by the investor would be entitled to permanent residency in the US. The minimum investment amount has been $500,000 for a long time. There are discussions right now over the last year to increase the minimum investment amount from $500,000 to possibly $800,000. So these are some of the contentious issues that Congress is dealing with. But from a legal standpoint, the functionality of the program remains the same. So let's talk about some of the 2 big requirements. Number 1, do you have the clicker? Let's see, okay. All right. So number 1, investors make an at-risk investment into a new commercial enterprise. Now, kind of going back into what Adrian had mentioned, the difference between the regional center and the direct EB-5, you have to understand that when the investor puts the money into the project, the argument is that this money must be at risk. Now, this is a particular concern that I always have with Indians when I meet them during my several meetings. The requirement of at risk, what exactly that means, right? So this basically means that if you put your money in the project, there is some possibility that at the end of your immigration process, you may not get the full $500,000 back, right? You're investing in a business, you're investing in the stock market. It's the same concept. You may make money, you may lose money. But as long as you create the jobs and you meet the other requirements, you will get permanent residency, right? The second thing in terms of the job creation is this creation of at least 10 jobs. So as Adrian pointed out, the differences between the regional center model and the direct EB-5 model, understand that in a direct EB-5, where we're spending a little bit more of our time today, you have to create W-2 jobs. So if you're opening a restaurant and you're going to have a manager of the restaurant, you're going to have servers, you're going to have a bartender, those are all going to count towards a direct 10 jobs. These individuals have to work at least 35 hours per week. If you're investing in a regional center project, which typically is real estate driven, we're going to do the direct and induced jobs that Adrian had mentioned. So those 2 types of differences are permanent, they're important to consider. Now, here are the 3 steps in EB-5. The first step, the project basically puts together all the documentation. So the investor, when they're looking at the project, they have to come up with two sound issues. Number one, what is the source of my money? All right, in India, there is a lot of money, and especially politically, you're all aware what's going on in India right now with the 500 rupee note and the 1,000 rupee note. It's created a lot of headaches for many people, but it's that issue of black money. So what the US government does not want is 5 lakh US coming into the country and it's black. They want it to be white money. They want it to be money that's been sourced. So this initial first application, the I-526, you're proving two things. Number one, who is the investor? What is the investor's background? And how did the investor make that 5 lakhs? And more importantly, how did that 5 lakhs come into the US and enter the project? That's the first part of this I-526 application. The second part of the I-526 application is, what is the project you're investing in? Why is the project credible? And how is the project going to create the necessary jobs? So you're presenting a business plan. You're presenting fundamental economics of the project. You're showing a pro forma. And you're going to make all of this attestation to USCIS that, hey, I'm putting 5 lakh US into that restaurant. It's going to be on such and such avenue, and it's going to create these many jobs. Here is the pro forma of exactly how it's going to function. I'm going to put 200,000 into construction. I'm going to put some money into furniture fixtures, maybe 100,000. I'm going to put 100,000 into staffing. You break it down in that format. So most people who are entrepreneurial have an understanding of how the business works. The next part, and this is the important thing of the counselor adjustment process. As of today, that initial application, the 526, is taking around 16 months. Now, one thing I have to mention here, that number fluctuates every month. So as Adrian was mentioning, the number of pending applications that are sitting with USCIS, they're really high. So every month we will see a fluctuation. Some months it's 14 months, some months it's 13 months. This month it's about 15.4 months. Next month we may see it either higher or lower. So once you cross that first application threshold, you've convinced USCIS that your money is white. You've convinced USCIS that your project is credible. Then you go for the counselor process. So if you're in Mumbai or you're in Delhi or one of the other cities, we make you an appointment at the US Embassy and you go in for the interview. It's kind of similar to what many of the attendees have done when they went for the B1, B2 visa, except it's a lot more intense. So they're really going to ask you a lot more questions. Once you cross that application, you get a stamp in your passport. Then you have 6 months to travel into the US. The minute you enter the US and you cross Customs and Border Patrol, you become a conditional permanent resident. This means you get a 2-year green card. The 2-year green card is the same as a 10-year green card. The only difference is 2 years versus 10 years, but you can live here, you can work here, and most importantly, you have to pay taxes, right? So it's really important. The US government wants to get paid its taxes. At the end of that 2-year period, we're going to go back again for your final application. It's called the I-829 application. At this step, you're going to tell USCIS, everything you told them at the first step in I-526, here's proof it happened. 5 lakh US was invested. Jobs were created. You remained a resident of the United States. You paid your taxes, and you did not violate any laws. Assuming you meet that requirement, you get issued a permanent 10-year green card. After that period, wait another 2 or 3 years. If you meet the residency test, then you can apply for citizenship. That's generally the process. Now, in terms of whether we're looking at the analysis and saying, okay, which is a better way to go? Should I go an L1 or should I go an H1B? At the end of the day, this is the simplest process to go through, simplest in the sense of you're investing money. Obviously, it's going to take a lot of time to do due diligence, but at the end of the day, it's faster than a lot of the other processes. On the other hand, it's expensive. It's 5 lakh US you're putting in, you may or may not get it back. All right, so I talked a little bit about the general burden of the 526. One thing we have to be sure about, many people think, okay, I can run a business in India, I can run a business in Ahmedabad or in Chennai or in Chandigarh, and therefore I can do it here. We have to be really sort of conscious that at the end of the day, when you're running a business in the US, there are a lot of different requirements. If you don't meet those requirements, your application could be in jeopardy. And this is a constant issue that I face when I meet with some of my Indian clients in India, because the level of due diligence, they're always worried because they're looking at some of the regional center projects and they say, well, page 98 says, I may lose my money. Yes, you may lose your money. But if you handle the project yourself, you don't make the requirements, you will definitely lose your money, you're not going to create the jobs, and you won't get the green card. So those are things that people have to be very conscious about. We also talked about the general burden at the 829 stage. You have to prove that the jobs were created. You have to prove that you complied with I-9 requirements under the US laws. And you have to prove that at the end of the day, you were a good permanent resident of the United States. If you make all of those attestations and they're all provable, then you get your permanent green card. Now, let's talk about what sort of source you need for the 5 lakh US. Some people, they have ready cash. So they worked for a long time, they had a government job, or they worked with one of the big technology companies, they made a lot of money, they put all that money in a savings account, into a CD, made 8% interest for several years, and now they have a lot of money sitting there. That's one thing. But again, we have to show that taxes were paid in India. Because if you didn't show and demonstrate that you were a good citizen in India, the US government's going to worry whether you're going to be a good citizen here in the US, right? So we have to prove that it's white money, tax-paid money, and we're going to show all that documentation. So for all intents and purposes, we're going back 7 years to gather all the information. The second thing, it can be a gift you have from the grandfather or from the parent gifting to the child. We go back and then we source the parent's money or the uncle's money or the grandfather's money to make sure that that money, again, is white. So the concept of white money becomes really important here. It could be a loan. Some people take loans in order to fulfill the EB-5. So to get that money, they put an asset, such as their house, up for collateral, and then they're able to get enough money from the bank, and then they use it for EB-5. Now, of course, if you're taking a loan in India at 15%, probably not a good investment, because that's a really expensive loan. So definitely something to consider. Sale of property, very, very important part. Now, Adrian talked a lot about China. India has the same thing. In China, a lot of people became millionaires overnight because they had property that was just, inflated value. They bought at 200,000, all of a sudden the value was 2 million within a span of 2 years. Overnight, they had that money, and then they were able to use that and leverage it for EB-5 purposes. Same thing happens in India. Now, here's a big problem that happens with the black. If we're going to sell the property, what happens? You're going to sell it for 5 crores. You're going to take 2 crores white, 3 crores cash. That becomes a problem. How do we prove the 3 crore in cash? Right? So those are some of the symptoms that we have to be able to prove again. And then sale of stocks. So a lot of people, if they've invested in the stock market and they have the money, as long as we can show how they purchased the stocks initially, we will have sufficient information there. Now, why are we making this presentation? So number one, I'm privileged to be a guest here, and I owe it to Satishji for inviting me to come here. But one thing that's lacking in India is this level of awareness, which I mentioned at the start of this presentation. When I go and I present in a room, if I do a comparison, this room I'm actually very happy about. When I asked how many people had heard about it, this was a good number. So it looked at least 35% of the room had heard about EB-5. If I do the same presentation in Delhi, I will hardly get 5% of the room have actually heard of EB-5. If I go to Shanghai and I do the same presentation in a room full of these many people, 95% of the people have heard about EB-5. So the awareness is definitely lacking. In India, though, a lot of people know about the F1 visas because parents want their kids to come here. A lot of people know about the Canadian visas. They know about the Australian program. They know about the UK program. But there's still a lot of people that think EB-5 is fraud. How is it that I'm going to invest 5 lakh US and I can get permanent residency? It's actually a true program. Thousands and thousands of investors have done this every year. But in India, it's very difficult. The black money hurdle is also a problem, but we have the same exact hurdles in China. It's not necessarily new. Now, this is an important element, retraining the focus that this is an immigration program, it's not really an investment. So let me give you an example of how the average due diligence works for an Indian. So I start talking with a client a year ago, and we have several phone calls, and then the client says, okay, I'm going to look at 3 projects. He gets all the documentation, 700-800 pages worth of documentation in a regional center project, reads through everything, scans every single page, marks up all the several risks, all the negative factors. Focus on the negative, do not focus on the positive, right? And then come back to me and said, okay, page 92 says that of this one, page 76 of that one says that, and page 12 where this one says that. Okay. Finally, he gets comfortable and says, all right, I'm ready, I pick project number 1. Fine. I think I'm done, but we're not. Then he says, well, I'm going to now go speak to 3 of my friends and ask them for their advice. This will take another 3 months. Then he will come back to me again, and then he will say, okay, my 3 friends have all agreed we're going in this one. Now, I need to come visit the project. Okay, so then he has to apply for a B1, B2 visa, goes through that process, then comes in, visits with me, then goes to see the project. Next thing I know, he wants to do Vastu on the project. So which side does it face south? No, we're not doing this one anymore. Now I'm going to go to another project. Finally, when he finds the project that he likes, he's like, well, ek aur baat, pandit se baat karna hai. Pandit ne kya kaha? 6 mahine roko. Right? So in this way, we start for a year and a half, the investor doesn't make. It's a risk-averse methodology. Now, it's not that the Chinese investors are risk lovers, but they just have a lot more familiarity with it. And so the idea of pulling that plug and making a decision takes a long time. But it's the concept of why it's important to do it, because if you're going to send your children to come to the US and they're going to study here, and they're going to jump from an F1 visa, and then they're going to get an OPT. From OPT, they're going to get an H1, if they even make the H1 lottery, and then they're going to be in the priority date for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. They're going to jump through many hurdles. EB-5 will help expedite that. EB-5 will get you past all of that and then get you into a better school. So those are some of the important things. But that's an issue that we need to be careful about, of how long it takes. And then, at the end of the day, some people wonder, well, program. Now, one of the biggest risks is that there's a possible increase in the minimum investment amount. It's been 500,000 since 1990. It has to increase. So a lot of people are saying, well, now it's becoming 800,000. That's too much. RBI restriction of 250,000 is going to be too much. How are we going to meet that? There are a lot of hurdles, but in China, the hurdle of actually getting your money out is 50,000 US per person per fiscal year. In India, it's 250. If you can do it in China, you can do it legally, of course. You can do it in India as well. You just have to comply, meet with tax attorneys. I met someone from Fox Mendel here today, very renowned firm. Groups like that can definitely help you to help with your assets in India, park your funds appropriately, and then assist you in the accounting front and getting your money out. So it obviously all has to be legal. But at the end of the day, is this worth it? It's definitely worth it. I think we'll take some questions. Or no. Satish has a few words.
Thank you, Rohit. So as you heard what the EB-5 program is about, EB-5 is a very complex subject. We try to give as much information as possible in the time. And if you can meet with us rest afterwards. If you have any questions, Rohit will be here for a short while. But meanwhile, we'll just start taking the questions from the audience. And I see a lot of hands moving around here. So, yes, please.
What kind of businesses can you invest in?
You want me to take it? Yeah.
Okay. definitely a business that can get us a better mic. So there are a lot of different businesses. The best type of business to invest in is something that's going to be job creation heavy. Some of the most popular direct EB5 jobs tend to be, as Adrian had mentioned earlier, in the fast food, quick service restaurant arena. So a lot of people do open up pizzerias, they open up sandwich stores, usually with franchises, because in the franchise side, at least you're working with a group that knows what they're doing. And so you have a franchisor that's going to make you meet all the requirements. That's generally the best way. Some people, particularly in the Indian community, like to focus on hotels. Hotels are very important, but remember, it's 10 full-time jobs. So these are minimum of 35 hours per week. And some people open up dental practices. So again, at the end of the day, as long as you can create the sufficient level of jobs, that's important. The other thing, we didn't talk about two other types of EB5s, which were expansion of an existing business or purchase of a failing business. Those are a little bit more complicated, so we didn't really focus on that, but that could work as well. And we can spend some time. I think, Adrian, you had some thoughts.
Yeah, I think most important when you look at a project is how well it's planned out. I've seen some very terrible hotel deals, and I've seen some very good hotel deals. I've seen some very good IT projects. I've seen some very bad IT projects. I can't tell you how many little I's and T's that have to be dotted and crossed in the whole process. One thing that you have to remember too is we talk about 10 jobs, and there's kind of this, I've talked to people who are going to do their own project, or somebody who's got a friend overseas that's going to invest in their business is like, well, you know, if nothing else at the end of the period, I'm just going to go hire 10 people off the street. Well, it doesn't work like that. You're going to get something called an EB5 compliant business plan, which is different in several very significant ways from a regular business plan you would just provide to regular investors. One thing that this is going to do, it's actually going to set out your hiring timeline. While it's not, USCIS is not going to stick your feet in the cement completely to it, you are going to have to set forth a viable, sensible path that by year 2 we're going to hire these people. By year 3 we're going to hire these people. So to run out at the end of the day because your business hasn't done what it's supposed to do and go hire 10 people isn't going to pass muster at the end of the day. The other thing these people have to do is you're going to use somebody who's experienced to put together this business plan. They're actually going to go out in the community and figure out what similar businesses are paying these people. So if the average in the community for the person who runs the your manager at your restaurant is supposed to get paid $35,000, $40,000 a year, you better be in line with that. You can't pay him a minimum wage. So just the preparation, regardless of what the business is so important.
Which means they cannot be contractors. They have to be W-2. So no avoiding payroll taxes.
And how long do you have to provide the employment for? Or how long does this business have to run for?
So this business has to be in perpetuity. I mean, you're basically presenting that this business has a time span. And generally, under the immigration requirements, if we look at the 3 steps I mentioned a little earlier, the I-526, the adjustment of status or the consular processing, and then the 829, for the average Indian investor, that time span is around 5 years. So your business should be at least a minimum of 5 years because you cannot, in any shape or form, withdraw any of your invested capital. You can certainly enjoy the interest, but you cannot withdraw the capital contribution prior to the end of the immigration process. So minimum, at least, think of it as 5 years. We could get into the more complex definitions of what that means, but yeah, that's sufficient.
Hello. It's a very informative session. Thank you for that. I have a question like, as you told, like there is a limit of investment from 500K to increase maybe 800K or something more. So if someone apply or maybe within a shorter time before the law will be effect, what is the lock-in date for the 500K?
There is no lock-in date. Till the rules change, you can apply.
So he need to invest 300K more or the?
No, once you invest, the money goes into, the investment goes to the business, for example, and that's the time starts.
Okay,
so that's the cutoff time. You don't have anything, if the rule changes, they will not ask you to go increase by 300,000.
There is a little bit of gray area to this. Congressman Goodlatte, who actually we invited out to a couple of our conferences and unfortunately is not being a friend to us in the industry as much as we'd like, he actually had a bill that was floated in September that would actually had a retroactivity clause to it that would have required some investors who had invested at $500,000 to go back and put in the $300,000 extra on top of it. Now, this was incredibly widely opposed by the community for a number of reasons. Number one, it's just not fair. It's ridiculous. Number two, a lot of these projects only needed the amount of money that they got. So you can imagine a larger project that took in 30, 40, 50 investors. That's a lot of extra money. You have to find